Sirius and the Suez Canal, a canal-antenna for opening the gates. The silence of the Sinai Peninsula desert on one scorchingly hot day in 1860 was suddenly shattered by a dull, low rumble, as if an ancient serpent had risen from deep within the earth, awakened after millennia of slumber. And this sound was neither thunder, nor a seismic tremor, nor the song of the wind, but something else entirely. Something modern historians stubbornly insist was merely the noise of the first steam-powered excavators. Yet, if you listen carefully to old eyewitness accounts, letters from French engineers, diaries of Egyptian laborers, notes from British diplomats who happened to be in Cairo at the time, you hear something far stranger. People do not describe the roar of machinery, but rather a peculiar vibrating hum, seemingly emanating not from the surface of the earth, but from deep within it, as if someone had already begun digging far beneath the sands of Suez many years before official construction ever commenced, as if the canal was not built but unearthed, as if the earth was not yielding to water, but rather water was returning to the surface what had long been hidden and sealed away. And it is precisely this idea, seemingly mad at first glance, yet increasingly substantiated each year by archaeological accidents, unpublished reports, and uncanny coincidences, that compels us to ask, is it true that we've been told the whole story of the Suez Canal? Or is what we know merely a convenient version for those in power, designed to conceal something far older, far grander, and perhaps far more dangerous than a simple 19th century engineering project? For when you dig into it, the official narrative is riddled with contradictions, from how such a massive undertaking was even feasible with the technology of the time, to why Egyptian ruler Said Pasha so abruptly and seemingly without cause agreed to an adventure that would ultimately bankrupt his treasury and bring his country to the brink of financial collapse. Yet the man who issued the order was no fool. He understood the risks perfectly well, and so there must have existed something that outweighed all economic calculations, something never mentioned in any textbook, never appearing in any diplomatic protocol, but possibly leaving traces in the sands, in archives, in underground corridors still rumored to be explored today under conditions of utmost secrecy. The story does not begin with Ferdinand de Lesseps, as schoolbooks teach, but much earlier, thousands of years before him, when Egypt as we know it did not yet exist, nor Rome nor Greece, but civilizations flourished along the Nile, known to us only through fragmented hieroglyphic inscriptions and strange artifacts that fit none of the accepted chronological frameworks. And one such artifact is the so-called Stele of Pharaoh Senusret III, now housed in the Cairo Museum under inventory number JE37492, on which it is stated clearly and unambiguously that during this pharaoh's reign, approximately 1851 years before our era, a navigable waterway already existed connecting the Red Sea to the Nile. And this was no primitive barge route, but a full-fledged canal navigated by ships carrying incense, ivory, and ebony from distant Punt. And although mainstream Egyptology still insists this is merely metaphor or poetic exaggeration, a close reading of the inscription tells a different story. It lists precise names of locks, names of construction overseers, even specifies the volume of excavated earth, 20 million cubic cubits, which, when converted into modern meters, yields a figure astonishingly close to the earthworks volume of the modern canal. And all this despite the fact that tools of the time were made exclusively of copper and wood, and the labor force consisted not of mechanical excavators, but of men and oxen. So the legitimate question arises, how 3,500 years before the age of steam and steel did the ancient Egyptians accomplish such a colossal feat? And more importantly, why? After all, trade with Punt could have been conducted by sea or caravan routes, yet the pharaoh poured not just resources, but virtually the entire treasury of his state into this project, as if the canal were not an economic venture, but a ritual structure, as if water here played not a utilitarian, but a sacred role. And indeed, in ancient Egyptian mythology, water is not merely a natural element, but a manifestation of divine essence, the path along which the soul of the deceased journeys to the afterlife. And if we compare this to the map of Duat, the underworld described in the Book of Gates, the contours of this ancient waterway strikingly resemble the route traversed by the sun god Ra during his 12 nocturnal hours. If we imagine the canal as a terrestrial analog of this path, it becomes clear why it was built not so much for commerce as for the preservation of cosmic order, to ensure that earthly reality mirrored the celestial. And then an even more unsettling thought emerges. What if the modern Suez Canal is not a new construction at all, but a restoration of an ancient route? And not merely a restoration, but an activation of something deliberately flooded, buried, and forgotten. But let's return to the 19th century, to the figure of Ferdinand de Lesseps, the man hailed as father of the Suez Canal, whose biography, upon closer inspection, turns out to be remarkably strange. He was not an engineer, had no experience whatsoever in hydraulic construction, had served as a diplomat in Tunis and Alexandria, and then in 1854, just months after the death of his friend Muhammad Ali, he somehow secured a private audience with the new Khedive Said Pasha and convinced him in a single evening to sign the concession for construction. Here the question arises, how did a diplomat with no background in infrastructure projects persuade the ruler of Egypt to invest in a venture projected to cost 150 million francs when Egypt's entire annual revenue at the time was only about 30 million? The answer offered by official sources sounds naive. De Lesseps was a charismatic orator. Yet, if we examine his correspondence with European bankers, Masonic lodges, and members of the secret council of the Rosicrucian order, it becomes clear that a far more powerful force stood behind him, a force uninterested in profit from ship passage, but deeply invested in something else entirely, something tied to the very location of the canal itself. For if you overlay a map of the Suez Canal onto a star chart from the time of its construction, an astonishing coincidence emerges. The canal's axis aligns almost perfectly with the ecliptic at the winter solstice, and its bends replicate the annual trajectory of Sirius across the horizon. And this is no accident, because in Masonic archives, particularly in manuscripts from the Lodge Grand Orient de France, preserved drawings mark the canal not as an engineering structure, but as the terrestrial meridian of Sirius, and in accompanying notes it is written, "Water must flow from south to north during the days of the star's direct rising, so that the gates may be opened." And whatever this may mean, in 1869, on the very day of the canal's grand opening, November 12th, Sirius rose above the horizon of Cairo for the first time after a 6-month period of invisibility, and the ceremony for releasing the water was scheduled for 8:45 in the morning, the exact moment of the star's rising. If this is coincidence, it is astonishingly precise. Even official protocols from that day note that at the instant water first touched the northern end of Lake Timsah, a strange sound echoed across the desert, as if someone deep underground had struck a colossal bell. And this sound was recorded not only by ceremony participants, but also by meteorological stations in Alexandria and Port Said. Though later dismissed as resonance in geological layers, geophysicists still cannot explain how a sound wave could travel 120 kilometers without energy loss, and most crucially, where the source capable of producing such a powerful vibration originated. If we delve into the archives of the French Geographical Society, specifically in a restricted access section still closed to the public, we find a report by engineer Jules Bourdin, one of the earliest construction supervisors, who vanished abruptly in 1861, leaving only a note, "They must not know what lies beneath us." Though his body was never found, his personal diary surfaced a month later aboard the steamship Sphinx, discovered crewless off the Red Sea coast. And in this diary, beginning in February of that year, appear strange entries. Today, crew number 7 struck a smooth surface at a depth of 7 fathoms, not stone, not granite, not basalt, but something resembling polished black obsidian, yet harder than diamond. And further, yesterday we used diamond-tipped drills, futile as if drilling air. And again, night of March 6th, the sound, it returned, the same hum as before, but now accompanied by vibrations that cracked the windows in camp. And the most alarming entry, "I saw it in the fissure opened by the blast, not an eye, no, not an eye, but something larger, something gazing not at me, but through me, and in that moment I understood, we are not building a canal, we are unsealing a tomb." Although this diary was declared a forgery, in 1993, during repairs at the El Cantana lock, workers did discover a fragment of a black slab covered in incomprehensible symbols resembling cuneiform, yet matching no known script. And after an engineer attempted to photograph it, the film in all 3 cameras was overexposed, and the fragment itself vanished 2 days later as if it had never existed. The official report on this incident was stamped top secret and remains classified to this day. If this is coincidence, then far too many such coincidences cluster around a single object to be dismissed as random. Indeed, even in MI6 reports from 1947, as Britain withdrew from Egypt, there is mention of unexplained anomalies in the Suez area, noting that on certain days of the year, coinciding with ancient Egyptian festivals, sensors register sharp spikes in the magnetic field, and canal water changes density and transparency for several hours without apparent cause. Moreover, in 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, Israeli intelligence officers occupying the Lake Timsah area reported a strange mist rising from the water at midnight, within which voices speaking an unknown language could be heard. And following this incident, operations in the area were suspended by direct order from Tel Aviv, with no further reports ever filed. Now consider this. Why, in 1956, when Egypt nationalized the canal, did the entire world suddenly panic, prompting Britain, France, and Israel to launch a military operation immediately, despite the risk of nuclear escalation? After all, if the issue were merely control over trade routes, negotiation would have been possible. Instead, war erupted. And the strangest part is that after just 5 days of fighting, when Egyptian forces were on the verge of collapse, Britain and France abruptly halted their advance, despite complete air and ground superiority. The official explanation, pressure from the US and USSR, rings hollow, for at that time dependence on American policy was not yet so absolute, nor was there a real threat from the Soviet Union, which was then preoccupied with suppressing the Hungarian uprising. Thus, only one logical conclusion remains. Someone at the highest level ordered the operation stopped because close physical proximity to certain points along the canal posed a threat, not military, not political, but of an entirely different nature. The threat of disturbing something securely buried beneath layers of water and earth. And if we analyze the battle maps, we notice that Israeli forces halted 37 kilometers east of Lake Timsah, precisely where, according to ancient maps preserved in a single surviving copy at the monastery of St. Sabas from the Alexandrian Library, stood the Temple of the Twin Gates. And on that map, beside the temple, a warning is inscribed in Coptic. Here, the gates are sealed not with iron, but with time, and whoever touches them shall tear the fabric of days. Though most scholars dismiss this as myth, in 1989, the Soviet satellite Phobos Grunt-M, conducting gravimetric surveys of the Near East, detected an anomaly in that very region, a zone of negative gravity, as if something with inverted mass lay beneath the surface. When the data reached the Space Intelligence Center in Yevpatoria, it was immediately classified, and only in 2016 did a former employee admit, "We chose not to investigate further because we realized this is not a natural phenomenon." Then recall Plato's words in the Critias, "Where there is now water, there was land, and where there is land, water, for a great cataclysm overturned all things." And if Egypt was indeed part of Atlantis, as some researchers claim, then the Suez Canal is not merely a shipping lane, but a fault line, a seam along which continents once shifted. And perhaps that is why the water here behaves so strangely, because it does not simply flow through a dug channel, but follows an ancient fracture, a suture between two worlds. It is no wonder then that in 1991, during the so-called Gulf War, American Los Angeles-class submarines patrolling the Red Sea detected something beneath the canal which they initially mistook for seismic activity, but soon realized it was not tremors, but rhythmic pulses repeating every 43 minutes. And when they attempted to locate the source, sonar indicated the signal originated not from the seabed, but from a depth of 4 kilometers, precisely where geology says only solid mantle rock should exist. Moreover, spectral analysis revealed the pulses contained not random noise, but a structured signal resembling language, yet not human language, but something older, slower, as if something down there is breathing, sleeping, or waiting. After this incident, all military operations in the canal zone were reclassified as observation without intervention, and to this day, no nation deploys permanent underwater stations there, as if all who know the truth silently observe a truce with whatever lies submerged. And now we arrive at the most disturbing part, what modern authorities conceal. In 2016, when Egypt launched the new Suez Canal expansion project, few noticed that excavations occurred not only at the surface, but down to 15 meters using new technologies, laser cutting and ultrasonic scanners, and in the reports of the Suez Canal Authority from that period appear strange lines. At kilometer 76, an unexpected cavity, volume approximately 20,000 cubic meters, walls covered with a glassy layer resembling fulgurite, yet formed without lightning. And further, within the cavity, ceramic fragments bearing symbols matching no known culture, age estimated at no less than 10,000 years. Though officially labeled remnants of an ancient lake, independent geologists who gained access to samples declared the glassy layer's composition has no terrestrial analog. It contains isotopes found only in meteorites. And more alarmingly, when heated to 300 degrees, it glows blue and emits a faint magnetic field. Most frightening of all, in water samples taken from the cavity, microorganisms were discovered whose DNA matches no known life form on Earth. And when geneticists attempted to sequence their genome, computers returned an error, invalid nucleotide sequence. After this, all research was transferred to military control, and since then, no civilian institution has gained access to these samples. But an even more troubling incident occurred in 2019 when the cargo ship Ever Given became lodged in the canal, paralyzing global trade for several days. And while all media portrayed it as a clumsy accident, few knew that 3 hours prior, satellites detected a sharp spike in infrared radiation in that exact location, and that the ship's captain lost his voice apparatus the day before. Doctors could not determine the cause, and he later stated in an interview, "I didn't fall asleep at the wheel, I simply stopped hearing sounds. Then came light, then silence, and only afterward realized the ship was no longer responding." If this was not hallucination, then something in that location affected human perception, equipment function, and even the physics of space itself. And perhaps that is why authorities so swiftly approved the expansion. not to increase capacity, but to install new shielding, new sensors, new suppression systems, because whatever is awakening beneath the canal is no longer sleeping. It is stirring, reacting, and each time a vessel of a certain mass, speed, and timing passes through the canal at a specific astronomical moment, the water briefly turns black as pitch, and those who have witnessed it say the same thing. It's not a shadow, it's the absence of light, as if the water ceases to be water. So the central question arises, what if all this is not conspiracy theory, not the ravings of a madman, not a string of coincidences, but a real, though concealed truth, that the Suez Canal was built not for trade, not for control, but for containment, for restraint, for maintaining the balance between what must remain underground and what exists on the surface, and that those who know the truth silently uphold this balance, withholding archives, suppressing data, preventing scientists from digging too deep, because once in 1869 they nearly opened the gates, and the rumble that swept across the desert that day was merely a warning. And if we continue to ignore these signals, to dismiss them as coincidence, to cling to the simplified version of history, then one day we will hear that rumble again, not as a vibration in the earth, but as a roar splitting the sky. And then it will be too late to ask, who built the Suez Canal? For the answer will arrive on its own, from the depths, from the darkness, from time itself, which we thought we had conquered, but which may only have been waiting for its hour to remind us we do not command the water, we do not draw the maps, and we do not decide when to open the gates. We are merely guests in a house whose foundations plunge into the abyss, and as long as we remain quiet, as long as we do not knock on the walls, as long as we do not try to read the inscriptions on the doors, we are left in peace. But make one wrong step, and the ground beneath us vanishes, and we finally understand, we never built this canal. We were only sweeping the threshold of a stranger's home, and the owners have long been watching us from behind the door, waiting for the moment we finally grasped that the sound first heard in 1860 was not the beginning of construction, but the first step toward our own awakening. And perhaps not even awakening, but invitation. For the water in the canal flows not merely from south to north, it flows from past to future, and every ship that traverses it leaves a trail in time, one that someone down there is carefully studying. And one day, perhaps very soon, they will decide to respond, and then we will finally learn who truly built the Suez Canal. Not people, not pharaohs, not engineers, but those who arrived here long before us, who retreated deep within to wait, and who now wait not for us, but for the moment when the earth becomes whole again, when water returns to its ancient channels, and when the gates finally open, not for us, but for those who must return. Then we will understand that our entire history is not a path forward, but a circle, and the Suez Canal is not a scar on the planet's body, but a seam, and as long as it holds, the world remains stable. But seams have a way of tearing, especially when pressure builds behind them. And if you've read this far, if you feel a shiver, if you suddenly recall an old photograph or a strange dream tied to water and desert, do not dismiss it, for knowledge is not a curse, but a key, and whoever begins asking the right questions is already taking the first step toward understanding. Perhaps it is you, right now, in this very moment, becoming part of something greater. And it doesn't matter whether you believe this or not. What matters is that you keep listening, keep searching, keep doubting, because only through questioning, only through unease, only through the desire to unearth truth can humanity one day discover what lies beneath the Suez Canal. And when that day comes, we will no longer ask who built it. We will ask, who built us? And maybe then, at last, the water will speak again, but this time in a language we can understand. And then will begin not an end nor a beginning, but a continuation, the oldest story of all, which we are only now beginning to remember. And if you sense this story touches you too, if you want to know more, if you are ready to look beyond familiar explanations, then do not stop here. keep searching, read between the lines, listen to the silence between words, because truth is not in textbooks, not in reports, not in official statements. It is in the details, in the inconsistencies, in those very random coincidences that are, in fact, not random at all. And everyone who dares ask, what if we're being lied to, is already doing more than millions who prefer the comfort of a convenient fairy tale. For reality is not always bright, not always clear, but it is always true. And only truth can give us a chance to understand who we are, where we came from, and where we are going. Meanwhile, as water flows through the canal, as ships sail their course, as the world pretends all is well, we, those who know, who seek, who remember, stand guard, wait, listen, and hope that one day, on a morning when Sirius once again rises over the horizon and the canal water turns black as pitch, we will not be afraid, but will reach out not to close the gates, but to open them. For perhaps only then, in that very moment, will we finally hear the answer, not from the depths of the earth, but from the depths of ourselves.